Alright, and I would like to start by introducing you to the actual star of our show, since apparently it turns out it's not me. That is instead this giant 3-story tall machine that you've probably been staring at since you got in here in the very beginning. Now this is the world's largest air-insulated Van de Graaff generator. It was created by Robert Van de Graaff himself, and well, I could probably tell you quite a bit about this awesome machine, but I feel like at least some of you would rather see it in action instead, yeah?
No.
Yeah. So let's see just what this machine can do. Alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead, turn the machine on. I will be putting on these dashing red headphones, and you might want to cover your ears. Alrighty, so what do we think? Alright, good. I was a little worried there for a second, so it turns out that it seems like most of you actually really liked those bright flashes and loud noises, which is good because the show will be getting brighter and louder as we go on. If, however, you weren't a big fan of that, the show will be getting brighter and louder as we go on. In fact, at the very end of our show, I'm going to turn on as many of these machines as I possibly can, and we're going to have ourselves a full-on symphony of sparks. So we've got a few things to cover before we get there. So today, I specifically want to talk about the electric force. I want to talk about some of the really cool and fancy effects we can do with the electric force, as well as some of the dangers. So let's start off by, based on that fun demonstration, who here would say that the electric force is bright and loud? Raise your hands. Yeah, and I would have agreed with you, because that was definitely bright and loud, but turns out we would both be wrong, because the electric force itself is actually silent and invisible. Similar to another force we've all probably heard of called gravity. Now we can't see or hear gravity, but we can see, hear, and even feel the effects of gravity. When I jump, we see that I always come back down. If you are close enough, you might have heard me land. And we always feel that pull towards the earth. That's because gravity is a pulling force. But the electric force is actually a pulling and pushing force. That's because there are two types of electric charges. There are positive and negative. Now when you have opposite charges like a positive and negative, they attract or pull towards one another. But when you have same charges like two positives or two negatives, they repel or push away from one another. Now these charges are everywhere, they're in everything, but we can't see them or that pulling, pushing force. Instead, we see the effects, like when we see lightning. Now the reason that you don't see lightning everywhere all the time is because usually these charges are balanced. Now our Van de Graaff generator doesn't actually generate anything. Instead, it's really good at helping us unbalance those charges. It carries negative charges all the way to the very top to those domes where they begin to build and push away from one another. Try to find the fastest and simplest pathway right back to the ground where there are more positive charges to balance with. Part of my job is to raise something up, giving them a very clear path back to the ground. Now, another way that we can see the effects of the electric force are with these two smaller machines here. Tesla. Now the first thing we might notice with these machines are those purple sparks up at the top. Now the reason that we can see the effects of the electric force is because when those charges are moving through the air, they temporarily heat up the air so much that it glows. In fact, moving charges through the sky can actually heat up the air up to 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Now the next thing you might notice is that little buzzing sound. That buzz. Now the reason that we hear the effects of the electric force is because when those charges are moving through the air and they heat up the air expands. When it expands, it pushes the air next to it, which pushes the air next to that, pushing the air next to that, and so on and so forth, until it hits our ears. And so this is why we see and why we hear thunder, or see lightning, hear thunder. And finally, if I were to say walk over to these machines and touch the air around the sparks, or even the sparks themselves, I would definitely feel that heat, as well as maybe a shock. Just like we would definitely feel it if lightning were to strike right next to us. But since I don't really want to feel either of those things, instead, let's talk about what happens once we really start to understand that electric force a little bit better. Because then we can do some really fancy things with those effects. For instance, if I know just why those machines sound the way they do, that dull buzzing sound, perhaps we could change it. So, I want you guys to think, what would happen if I had a much larger than Tesla coil? And I just happen to have one. So I want you guys to look over to my left, this tall white column with what looks like a silver donut on top. Now I want you guys to make a prediction in your head. Will that larger Tesla coil sound any different than our two smaller ones? I will give you a hint though, because my headphones are going on for this. So, I would suggest you cover your ears, and let's find out in 3, 2, and 1. Alright, one more time. 3, 2, and 1. Alrighty, so you all probably realize that the sparks were much bigger and the sound was a lot louder. But if you were paying really close attention, you might have noticed that it was the exact same tone or note as these two smaller ones. That same buzz. And the reason for that is while it looks like these machines are producing one continuous spark, they're actually producing 120 sparks per second. Our eyes and ears just don't work that fast. So, and it turns out that if we have more sparks per second, we get a higher pitch note. And less sparks per second gives you a lower pitch note. And so now that we know how to get those different notes, well, all we really need are Tesla coils that can change the amount of sparks per second they produce. And you probably already know where I'm going with this, because of course I happen to have Tesla coils that can do that as well. This time I want you to focus on the two copper columns with the silver coils on top, light bulbs underneath. Now I want you to make a prediction again on whether you think that these will sound any different than our two smaller ones or even our bigger ones. I want you to especially focus on those subtle changes in sparks per second. See if you can tell just when they start to change those tones or notes. Friends over here, I will just ask that we are completely off of the red carpet. Make sure you're on blue carpet at all times. Thank you. Alrighty, friends. So once again, my headphones are going on. Let's see what happens. Alrighty, so turns out that they're not exactly subtle. In fact, once you can assign sparks per second to a note, you can make things like songs. Now, as you can probably imagine, our two Tesla coils here will have a leading role in our Symphony of Sparks finale. We've got one more thing to cover before we get there. Because we talked about those really fancy effects from the electric force. Now it's time to talk about the dangers. And lightning is, of course, one of those bigger dangers. So let's say you're outside, you are walking and you see lightning in the distance. Or you hear thunder roaring. You should go where? Inside. Inside, yeah, you should go indoors. Inside your house, inside your apartment, inside the Museum of Science. Any building that is completely covered is completely safe to be in during a lightning storm. But now let's say that you're not very close to many buildings. Maybe you drove out to the river and you're having a picnic. Maybe you went on a hike and now you see lightning in the distance. Or you hear thunder roaring. Now where should you go? Your car. And we all know that our cars are safe because of the rubber tires. Well, that makes sense. After all, tires are made out of rubber, and rubber is an insulator. That means that electric charges have a hard time moving through rubber. But hey, this is a Museum of Science. I can't just tell you something works. We need to see it. So, the first thing we need to test this is a giant lightning-making machine. Check. And the second thing we need is a rubber tire. Check. Now, as the great scientists that we are, we need to know how to interpret our results. So I want you guys to focus on the four white posts holding up that tire. If you see nothing there, that means the tire was able to stop the flow of electric charges, and this tire is the reason why we are safe in our cars during a lightning storm. If, however, you see a smaller little lightning strike between those four white posts, it means that the tire was not able to stop the flow of electric charges, and the tire is not the reason why we are safe. Alright, you guys have your mission, and let's go ahead. I'm going to start this machine. I'm going to let us really focus in on that tire. And once again, friends, my headphones are going on. Alrighty, so raise your hand if you saw that smaller little lightning strike between the four white posts. Yeah, I saw it too, which means that the tire is not the reason why we are safe in our cars during a lightning storm. Well, if I still think that the car is the reason why we are safe, or the car is the safest place to be other than a building during a lightning storm, what other material is a car made out of that might be able to help us? Metal! Yeah! Well, that was a little bit more confusing because we said that tire makes sense because rubber is an insulator. Many of you already know that metal is actually a conductor. That means that electric charges move through metal really easily. Still, we tried out the tire, so I guess it only makes sense that we tried out the metal. And well, I was specifically told I couldn't actually drive my car into the theater today. But some of you may have already noticed there's a giant metal bird cage in the middle of our stage that might be able to replicate the metal of a car quite nicely. And well, I guess the best way to test this is to put something alive inside the metal bird cage, strike that bird cage with lightning, and see if the metal thing survives. And well, I guess since I'm here, I'm volunteering. So, once again, I would like you guys to start making predictions in your head, because if it turns out that metal is the reason why we're safe in our cars during the lightning storm, then I will be perfectly safe, and I will survive this encounter. Yay! If, however, metal is not the reason why we're safe in our cars during a lightning storm, this is going to be a slightly shorter show than I planned. Sorry we're not getting to that finale, I promised, but hope you enjoy your day anyway. In all seriousness, though, I would like you to start making predictions on what I should and should not do in order to stay safe while completely surrounded by metal and being struck by lightning. Because at this point, I am basically the tallest thing in the theater, which means that this cage is going to get struck. So, I guess I am going to turn on our machine, and I'm going to cover my ears. You might want to do the same. And let's go ahead and see what happens when lightning strikes this cage. Alright, so it turns out that metal is the reason why we're safe in our cars during a lightning storm. That is due to something called the skin effect. Turns out that when rapidly changing high-frequency current, aka lightning, strikes a conductor like metal, those charges distribute to the outside of that conductor, meaning that the inside is perfectly safe. As long as you are completely surrounded by metal, like in a metal birdcage, a metal car that is not a convertible, or even a metal airplane, all perfectly safe places to be during a lightning storm. As you saw, even touching the metal inside was perfectly safe. If, however, my fingers had slipped through, had I touched the outside of the cage for any reason, that would have been a completely different lightning show altogether. Alright, ready? Now that we have done that, I think I promised you one last thing. Because we have now talked about the really fancy effects of the electric force, as well as some of those dangers. So now it is time for our Symphony of Sparks finale. Now, while our machines are starting to warm up, I would like to let you know that after our finale, that will be the very end of our show. I would like to thank you all so much for coming, and I would like to hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Now, go ahead, sit back, relax if you can, and let's enjoy our Symphony of Sparks. My headphones are definitely going on.
Bye.